much, not a foreseeable future.
Okay, that's damn. You suck.
That seems likely over time if we keep pushing for education, security, and critical.
Okay, let's play some damn chess.
All right, let's talk about the big one.
Street whore.
The ultimate sales pitch. The final carrot and the ultimate
Suck like slut.
Heaven and hell. Think about it. For modern Christianity,
You suck.
this is the entire ballgame,
You
right?
suck, my.
It's the central organizing principle. Be good, accept Jesus,
You suck.
get
my
your
dick, bitch.
golden ticket to the
You
pearly
suck
gates for an eternity of harp music
You
and
suck.
cloud
my
lounging.
dick, bitch.
Be bad, reject Jesus, or, just
Start the
happen to
damn
be
game
born
and
in the wrong
slut
part
out.
of the world.
Slut. Shut
And get a
up.
one-way, non-stop trip to the subterranean barbecue
slut
pit
out.
for an
Slut.
eternity of,
Shut up.
well, let's just say
Slut.
it ain't pleasant. This binary choice,
Street
eternal
whore.
bliss versus eternal agony, is hammered home from Sunday school onwards. It's the core motivation, the fundamental threat, and the ultimate promise that underpins the entire faith for
Suck my
billions of
fucking
people.
cock.
It is, without a doubt, the most important theological concept in Christianity once you get past the resurrection itself. So here's a fun little question for you. What if I told you that for the first two-thirds of the Bible story,
Fuck it.
for thousands of years of Jewish history, this entire world-defining, soul-saving concept
Cock.
just wasn't there? No, seriously. What if I told you that the foundational texts of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the books of Genesis, Exodus, Samuel, the
You
Psalms,
suck,
Isaiah,
dick, bitch.
none of them contain the concepts of heaven and hell, at least not as we know them today. It's like watching the first two movies of the Star Wars trilogy and no one ever mentions the Force. It's a plot hole so massive that you could fly a Star Destroyer clean through it. So where in the world did heaven and hell come from anyway? How did the single most important doctrine in modern Christianity manage to go completely unmentioned for over 1,000 years of its own sacred history?
Holy.
Today we're going to put on our theological detective hats. We're going to become biblical archaeologists, dusting off the ancient texts and digging through the layers of history to solve this very mystery. We're going to look at what the Old Testament actually says about the afterlife, what the New Testament suddenly introduces,
Holy Ghost.
and we're going to explore the three most likely solutions to this puzzle. And I'll give you a little hint. One solution is just bizarre. One is unbelievably cruel. And one changes absolutely everything. So stick around. This is going to be a fun one.
Ghost.
All right, let's start with the place that everyone's afraid of. The eternal lake of fire. The domain of Satan. The place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. Hell. If you're a Christian, avoiding this place is job number one. So you would assume that God, from the very beginning, would have made its existence crystal clear, right? You think that the warnings would be plastered all over the Old Testament. Well, let's take a look. Spoiler alert, they are not. When the Old Testament talks about the afterlife, the place where the dead go, it uses one primary word, Sheol. S-H-E-O-L. You can find it all over the place. When Jacob is mourning his son Joseph, whom he believes to be dead, he says in Genesis 37, verse 35, I shall go down to my son in mourning to Sheol. When the psalmist is in the depths of despair, he cries out in Psalm 88, For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to Sheol. But here's the crucial part. Sheol is not hell. It ain't even close.
Jesus
Sheol,
Christ.
in ancient Israelite thought, was a neutral, shadowy, subterranean realm. It was the pit, the land of silence and dust. And here's the key. Everyone went there. The good, the bad, the righteous, the wicked, the kings, the paupers, Israelites, Egyptians, Canaanites. Everybody punched a ticket to Sheol. There was no fire, no pitchforks, no eternal torment. It was more like a state of nothingness. A quiet, dusty, boring, permanent sleep. Think of it less like a torture chamber and more like a cosmic retirement home where the lights are always off and the staff has gone home for the day. I always like to think of it as what we currently think of with graveyards, as though there are souls hanging around there. But they're not really doing much unless you're totally into the occult. Except that in Sheol, that graveyard is below the earth instead of above. In Isaiah chapter 14, there's this incredible taunt against the king of Babylon, describing his arrival in the underworld. And it says, Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you. All who were leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations.
Goddamn cunt fucking.
It's a party of ghosts, not a pit of fire. But wait, I can hear some of you screaming, what about Gehenna? What about the worms that don't die and the fire that's not quenched? Great questions. Let's tackle those. The word that Jesus later uses for hell in the New Testament is Gehenna. But Gehenna wasn't originally a spiritual realm. It was a literal, physical place on earth. It was the Valley of Hinnom, a ravine just outside the walls of Jerusalem. Historically, it had a very dark reputation. The prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 7, verse 31, tells us that it was a place where ancient Israelites, falling into pagan practices, had actually performed child sacrifice, burning their sons and daughters in the fire to the god Moloch. Because of this horrific history, it became a cursed, holy, defiled place. In later times, it was essentially used as the city's garbage dump, a place where refuse, animal carcasses, and the bodies of executed criminals were thrown. And to consume all of this waste, there were constant fires smoldering. So when the prophet Isaiah, in the very last verse of his book, Isaiah 66:24, talks about the righteous going out and looking upon the dead bodies of their enemies, whose worm does not die and whose fire is not quenched, he's not describing a tour of metaphysical hell. He's using the visceral, disgusting image of the smoldering, maggot-infested city dump of Gehenna to describe the fate of God's enemies on earth. It's a picture of total, shameful destruction, but not eternal conscious torment in another dimension. So after sifting through the entire Hebrew Bible, the conclusion is inescapable. The concept of an eternal place of fiery punishment for the wicked is completely, utterly, and conspicuously absent. The biggest threat in modern Christianity didn't even exist in Old Testament theology. But what about the flip side? What about the big reward? Surely the Old Testament talks about heaven, right? Well,
hold on, goddamn fucking goddamn ghost. Listen, pit.
If hell is the stick, then heaven is the ultimate carrot. The promise of eternal life in paradise, walking with God, reunited with loved ones. It's the goal. It's the reason for enduring hardship on earth. So surely this glorious destination is described in detail from the very beginning.
God, the fucking goddamn Holy Ghost.
Let's go back to the text. The Old Testament talks about the heavens a lot. In Hebrew, it's the word, and I'm probably going to screw this up, shamayim, But almost every single time it's used, it's not talking about an afterlife destination for human souls. In Genesis 1, it's what God creates on the second day, the sky, the firmament. It's the physical cosmos. When the psalmist in Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God," he's talking about the stars and the sky. The heavens is also used to describe God's dwelling place. Psalm 115, verse 16 says it perfectly. "The heavens are the Lord's heavens, but the earth he has given to the children of men." There's a clear distinction. Heaven is God's house. Earth is our house. The idea of humans packing up and just moving into God's house after they die isn't part of the deal. When you died, you went down to Sheol, not up to the Shamayim. Now, again, there are a couple of tricky verses that apologists might point to. What about Enoch? Genesis 5, verse 24 says that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. It's incredibly mysterious and cool, but it's presented as a one-off, a bizarre exception for a singularly righteous man. It's not presented as a standard retirement plan for all believers. What about Elijah? In 2 Kings chapter 2, the prophet Elijah doesn't die. He gets picked up by a chariot of fire and taken into the heavens in a whirlwind. Again, totally awesome. Metal album cover stuff. But this is an extraordinary event for one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. It's not the template for what happens to your average Israelite farmer when he kicks the bucket. These are the exceptions that prove the rule. The very reason that these stories are so memorable is because they're so unique and contrary to what normally happened, which was a one-way trip down to Sheol. The focus of the entire Old Testament covenant between God and Israel is about this life and this earth. The promises are for land, for descendants, for national prosperity, for good harvests. The curses are for famine, disease, and exile. The entire moral and legal framework is built around creating a just and prosperous society here and now. The idea of enduring suffering in this life to get a cosmic payout in the next one is a profoundly New Testament idea, and it is almost entirely alien to the Old Testament. So now our mystery deepens. For over 1,000 years of sacred history, there is no eternal punishment for the wicked, and no eternal paradise for the righteous. The afterlife is a bleak, neutral, equal opportunity nothingness for everybody. And then, suddenly, everything changes. You turn the page from Malachi to Matthew, and it's like walking into a different theological universe. A young, itinerant preacher from Galilee named Jesus steps onto the scene, and suddenly, heaven and hell are not only real, they are the central, most urgent topic of conversation. Jesus talks about hell more than anyone else in the entire Bible, and he almost always uses that word that we talked about, Gehenna. He takes the image of that smoldering garbage dump outside Jerusalem and he weaponizes it, turning it into the primary metaphor for divine judgment. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 22, he warns that anyone who calls his brother a fool will be liable to the hell or Gehenna of fire. In Mark chapter 9, he gives his absolutely terrifying warning, saying, "And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, or Gehenna, to the unquenchable fire." He repeats this for your foot and your eye, The stakes had been raised from earthly consequences to eternal, fiery agony. Now, at the same time, he introduces the concept of heaven as a glorious reward for his followers. He says in Matthew 5, verse 12, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven." In John chapter 14, he gives that famous, comforting promise, "In my Father's house there are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you." To the thief on the cross next to him, he says in Luke 23, verse 43, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." The contrast is staggering. We went from 1,000 years of theological silence to a non-stop, high-stakes discussion of eternal destinies. It's like the Bible got a new writing staff for its final season who decided to completely retcon the entire premise of the show. This raises the most important question. If heaven and hell are real, and have always been the ultimate stakes for humanity, why this sudden reveal? Where did these ideas come from that they could be completely absent for millennia, and then suddenly become the cornerstone of Jesus' entire ministry? The answer isn't in the Bible itself. It's in the silent years between the Old and New Testaments. The period between the end of the Old Testament writing. The period between the end of the Old Testament writings and the beginning of the New Testament is often called the intertestamental period. It was about 400 years of immense change for the Jewish people. They were no longer an isolated tribal kingdom. They were now a small nation caught between giant, competing empires. First came the Persians, then Alexander the Great and the Greeks, and finally the Romans. This wasn't just a military and political change. It was a cultural and philosophical firehouse. New ideas, new languages, and new beliefs started flooding into Jewish thought. From the East, from Persian Zoroastrianism came a much stronger sense of dualism, a cosmic battle between a force of ultimate good. In the case of Zoroastrianism, that was Ahura Mazda, and a force of ultimate evil that they called Angra Mainyu. This worldview included concepts of a final judgment, bodily resurrection, and a separation of the righteous and the wicked into different afterlife realms. Sounding familiar? From the West, from Greco-Roman culture, came deeply developed ideas about the underworld itself. The Greeks didn't just have a single generic afterlife. They had the shadowy realm of Hades for the average person, but they also had Tartarus, a deep pit of torment for the enemies of the gods. And they had the Elysian Fields, a paradise reserved for great heroes. The idea of a tiered afterlife with different destinations based on your life on Earth was in the cultural water everyone was drinking. Now these foreign ideas began to mingle with Jewish thought, and you can see the evolution happening in Jewish texts written during this period. Books that aren't in the standard Protestant Bible, like the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch describes a multi-tiered heaven and a place of punishment for wicked angels and people. It's a clear development from the simple one-size-fits-all shield of the older texts. So by the time that Jesus of Nazareth began his ministry in the early 1st century AD, the concepts of a heavenly paradise for the good and a fiery hell for the wicked were no longer fringe or foreign ideas. They were popular, widespread theological developments within Judaism itself. The stage was perfectly set for a preacher to come along and make these ideas the centerpiece of his message. Which brings us back to our central mystery. We know the how, but we still don't know the why. Why this massive theological shift? We have three possible explanations that I've come up with. If there are others, please put comments below, because I still need to do some more research on this. But this is where things get really interesting. Okay, so we have a crime scene, a theological plot hole.
God,
the most important concepts in modern Christianity are missing from the first two-thirds of the evidence. We've established the timeline. Now we have to figure out the motive. Let's look at our three prime suspects for explaining this discrepancy. The first theory is that heaven and hell, as afterlife destinations for humans, literally did not exist during the Old Testament period. They were created or opened up by God sometime before the 1st century AD, but after the 4th century BCE. But let's just sit with that for a moment. This theory suggests that for millennia, God had one system in place. Everybody goes to the sleepy abyss of Sheol. Then one day he just changes his mind. He decides, out of the blue, that what the cosmos really needs is an eternal torture chamber. He renovates parts of the spiritual realm, cranks up the thermostat to infinity, and opens the doors to hell, right around the time that the Romans are building aqueducts. This idea is, on its face, patently absurd. But it's worse than absurd. It's morally monstrous. What does this say about the character of God? That he's reactive? That he's making up the rules as he goes along? What happened to all the wicked people who died before hell was open for business? Did they get a free pass? Did Cain and the corrupt kings and all the evil people of the Old Testament just get to chill out in Sheol forever because they had the good fortune to die before God built his inferno? This makes God seem less like an all-knowing, unchanging, perfectly just being, and more like a capricious, unstable landlord suddenly decides to add a dungeon to the basement of his apartment building. This theory is so logically and morally incoherent that almost no serious theologian would defend it. So let's move on to the more popular explanation. Now this here is the go-to explanation for many conservative Christians. The idea of progressive revelation is that God didn't reveal all of his truth to humanity at once. He doled it out in bits and pieces.
That's right.
As humanity became mature enough or ready to handle it. So the argument goes, God always knew about heaven and hell, but he kept it under wraps for a few thousand years because the ancient Israelites just weren't ready for that kind of heavy information. Now, at first glance, this may sound plausible. A good teacher doesn't teach quantum physics to a kindergarten. But the analogy falls apart instantly when you think about it for more than 3 seconds. We're not talking about complex physics here. We're talking about the single most critical piece of information for a person's eternal destiny. According to this theory, God gave the Israelites incredibly complex and detailed laws about everything. About what fabrics they could wear, what foods they could eat, how to handle mildew in their houses, intricate rules for animal sacrifices. They were ready for all of that. But they weren't ready to be told, hey, by the way, there's a place of eternal fire that you really want to avoid. And here's how. It's preposterous. It makes God out to be the most incompetent and criminally negligent teacher imaginable. If you accept this theory, you have to accept that for countless generations, millions upon millions of people lived and died and potentially went to an eternal hell without ever being clearly warned that it even existed. They were playing a game for the highest possible stakes without ever being told the rules. And without ever being told that they were playing the game. All because God, for some inexplicable reason, decided to keep the rule book hidden. That's not a loving father guiding his children. That is a cosmic parent who never tells his toddler that the stove is hot and then acts surprised when the child gets burned. It's not just intellectually bankrupt, it's morally reprehensible. Which leaves us with one final suspect. The one that, for many believers, is probably the most unthinkable and uncomfortable. But it's also the one that fits all the evidence perfectly. Then again, when have Christians ever been bothered by evidence? What if the reason that heaven and hell aren't in the Old Testament is simply because they hadn't been invented yet? Not by God, but by humans. Let's think about this like a human. You look around the world, and you see a profound sense of injustice. You see good, kind, hard-working people suffer their entire lives with disease and poverty. Conversely, you see cruel, corrupt, greedy people thrive, living in luxury and dying peacefully in old age. It doesn't seem fair. It screams out for some kind of cosmic rebalancing. So what do? You tell a story. You create a narrative where, after death, the scales are finally balanced. The good people who suffered on earth are rewarded with an eternity of bliss, and the evil people who got away with it all their lives finally get their comeuppance in a place of eternal punishment. It's a powerful, comforting, and psychologically satisfying story.
Amen.
It addresses our deepest need for justice and order in a chaotic world. Now, let's overlay this with the history that we just talked about. Every Israelite society had Sheol. No justice, just nothingness. But as they came into contact with other cultures that had more developed ideas of post-mortem justice, those ideas were appealing. They were adopted. They evolved. They were written about in new theological texts. By the first century, they were a common part of the religious landscape. Although, of course, they never got back written into the Old Testament. And then comes Jesus of Nazareth, a brilliant, charismatic Jewish rabbi living and preaching in first century Galilee. He was raised in this culture. He learned from teachers who were debating these very ideas. So when he talks about heaven and hell, he's not revealing a timeless, divine secret that God had been hiding for millennia. He's simply teaching and elaborating on a popular, contemporary, and ultimately man-made theological concept of his time. This theory actually explains everything perfectly. It explains the silence of the Old Testament. It explains the sudden obsession in the New Testament. It explains the historical development of the ideas. It requires no belief in a God who is either bizarrely reactive or sadistically negligent. It makes perfect, logical, historical sense. The only casualty of this theory, and I guess it is a big casualty depending upon where you come from theologically, is that it requires us to let go of the belief that Jesus was a divine being with secret knowledge of the cosmos. It asks us to see him as what the historical evidence suggests that he was. A man, a remarkable man, a revolutionary teacher, but a man of his time, teaching the ideas of his time. So where did heaven and hell come from? The evidence strongly suggests that they didn't come from a divine revelation at the dawn of time. They grew, they evolved, they were borrowed and adapted. They were born from our human yearning for justice, our fear of death, and our hope for something more. They are powerful stories, perhaps some of the most powerful stories ever told. But they appear to be just that, stories. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe the real takeaway from the ancient Hebrew scriptures wasn't that we should be good so that we can get a reward in the sky or avoid a punishment underground. Maybe their focus was in the right place all along. Maybe the point isn't to secure a mansion in the next life, but to build a more just, more compassionate, and more meaningful society in this one, which is the only life that we know for sure that we have. What do you think? Which theory makes the most sense to you? And where did I screw it all up? I'm sure you Christians have got some great hateful comments about how I'm going to burn in hell, and I'll be so sorry that I ever made this video. But for anyone who wants to contribute something thoughtful on this, I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you found this deep dive valuable, do me a solid. You know what to do. Hit the like, subscribe, whatever. I hope to see you around in future videos. I'm glad you've been here with me. If I have screwed up anything, if I have misread any aspect of Scripture, if I have misrepresented Yahweh or Jebus or the Holy Spirit, they are welcome to chime in and correct me at any time. Anything you guys want to add? Guys, you're always missing your cue. Always. Okay, well, maybe they'll be with us for the next video. Who knows? Thank you for being here. I hope to see you again soon on my channel. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.
I do. Who you bitch?
Aggressive view of what is or is not a denomination. Something that I would trust a little more as a barber insight. When it talks about Christian history, it has an article that talks about a list of all 46 types of Christianity. That feels a bit more functional than this kind of made-up idea of 45,000 different denominations. But even when we take it in that regard, you're talking about 46 different denominations of Christianity alone. And then, of course, we have all the other religions around the world. And if you don't think that these religious ideas impact the decisions and the goals of political leaders, then you're just not really paying much attention. Now, are there atheist leaders? Sure. Are there countries like Japan, for example, where the impact of religion is far lower than it is in the West? Sure, there is. But the idea that these world leaders and these nations cannot agree on common goods because of atheism is such a ridiculous and unfounded statement that it just beggars credulity.
Atheism is the denial or lack of belief in the existence of God. Many atheists reject universal or objective morality and adopt a view of morality that is subjective.
Okay, so here comes just another big flat fallacy. This idea that many atheists adopt a view of morality that is subjective. He is taking a ridiculous stretch that does not follow. It's a non sequitur. What I mean by that is this. He's talking about the idea that many atheists reject the idea of objective morality, and that is true. Many atheists do. That doesn't mean that they're immoral, and that doesn't mean that their morality is subjective. You can still base something on objective standards without having a universal objective morality. You need to look no further than this than to look at secular humanism. Now, to be clear, secular humanism is not the morality of atheists, and all atheists are not secular humanists. All secular humanists are not atheists. But secular humanism provides an excellent framework to show how you can have objective values for your morality without believing in some universal objective standard for your morality. In other words, when you say that you want to have a universal objective standard for your morality, usually what one is implying when they say that is that their objective standard is God. But that doesn't mean that you can't come to reason and logical, and in most cases, obvious examples of what is moral and what is not moral without retreating to this toddler mentality of what does God tell us to do.
Subjective morality can be defined as a system of morality that is based on the subject, or the individual and his preferences, feelings, culture, etc.
So he's going to go down the subjective morality hole because that is the straw man that he's going to build up as tall as he can before he lights it on fire. The sad part is that it's a complete and sad straw man, because again, there is no reason why being an atheist means that you have to have subjective morality.
To give an example, those who hold to subjective morality may value sexual freedom, or they may not value it. It is dependent on the individual's preferences. David Hume explains it best when he states, so that when you pronounce any action or character to be vicious, you mean nothing, but that from the constitution of your nature, you have a feeling or sentiment of blame from the contemplation of it. Vice and virtue, therefore, may be compared to sounds, colors, heat, and cold, which, according to modern philosophy, are not qualities and subjects, but perceptions in the mind.
Yeah, that's really lovely, except it has nothing to do with the typical idea of morality, because it is an obvious and, quite frankly, simple conclusion to come to realize that when you steal, it violates the property rights of others, it threatens the safety of our society, and ultimately it can threaten the foundations of our society entirely if everyone were allowed to steal whatever, whenever they want. That is not based on some subjective idea of who likes this color better or what makes me feel good. That is creating an objective standard, even though I don't believe in a universal objective standard that has to come down from your magic sky daddy.
This is contrasted with objective or universal morality, which can be defined as a system of morality that is applicable to any person, culture, or society. To give an example, a person who holds to objective morality may uphold murder to always be wrong in every situation.
This is a common trope that theists trot out whenever they want to attack the idea of morality and atheism. They talk about, well, if you have universal objective morality, then murder would be wrong in every situation. Murder is wrong in every situation, regardless of what framework you choose for morality, because the definition of murder is that it is an unjustified killing. Now, if you want to talk about whether killing is wrong at all times, that's an entirely different conversation. But when you use the word murder, the term itself implies by its very definition that murder is wrong, because if you've just killed someone, let's say you've killed an enemy combatant in a war, that has never been considered to be murder. And it's not murder. It is a killing, yes, but it's not murder. When someone attacks you in your home and you pick up a knife and you defend yourself and you end up killing them, that is not murder. That is killing. So this idea that you want to throw another ridiculous misdirection here with this term of murder just defines the fact that you are not trying to play fair, and you don't necessarily have the intellectual capacity to even engage in this argument.
Generally, those who uphold objective morality believe in God, and God being that being which gives the system of morality to mankind. or differently, constructs reality in human nature, such that they ought to act out or achieve certain goods and virtues and avoid those things which lack good or evil.
Again, you don't have to be Christian or theist or even deist to want to achieve certain goods and virtues and avoid those things which lack good. I'm sorry to break it to you, O Sanctus, but the fact is that this is not the exclusive domain of religious or Christian people.
Of course, then, a lack of belief in God's existence generally leads to a lack of belief in objective or universal morality. But then there becomes an issue with the practicality of this belief. For if we grant that subjective morality is true,
again, you're beating a straw man to death here. This idea that if we grant subjective morality is true, nobody ever held that up aside from you as an idea of that's what atheism is.
And objective morality isn't. The many absurd consequences result from this view. Thus today we shall drive atheism to its logical conclusion.
Its logical conclusion, even though you haven't managed to say anything that's really logical up to this point. But go ahead with your logical conclusions
regarding morality, purpose, and value. What then are these absurd consequences that result from atheism's subjective morality?
If atheists across the board had this idea that you have flaunted of subjective morality, I'm sure that it would lead to absurd consequences. Unfortunately, you are just beating the hell out of your lame little straw man.
Well, for one, it is impossible to tell another person that they have done something wrong.
So even if you are subjectively moral, there is no reason why it would be impossible to tell someone that they've done something wrong. Even under your lame-ass premise of this idea of subjective morality, if that was what atheists even clung to, you could absolutely tell someone that they've done something wrong. Because even if something is subjective, you would still have your own subjective viewpoint. But you don't seem to understand how subjectivity works. But that's okay, because hey, it's just your straw man anyway. Who really needs to understand it that well if you're just going to flog the hell out of it for your own theological ends?
For they are merely acting out their preferences. And by imposing your own preferences on another person, you attempt to make your preferences of morality the standard that all should follow.
Again, there is nothing about atheism that implies that all you are doing is just acting out your own preferences. There's nothing about atheism that implies that that's all atheists think are good. Going back again to my example of secular humanism, there are plenty of highly moral ideas that atheists around the world hold. And it's not because it's just what feels good. It's not just what's subjective to them. It is very easy, if you have a moral compass that is more advanced than that of a 5-year-old, to understand that those things which undermine society and undermine the common good and undermine the rights and the freedom of other people can be seen as being bad. And you don't have to be a theist to understand that. In fact, I would argue that many atheists understand that far better than theists ever will. Because I've never heard an atheist sit around and try to create a moral defense of slavery or genocide or any of the other crap that the Christians read from the Bible.
Thus, the most vilest of moral actions become illicit and acceptable. For as was stated, one can't really tell another person that rationally their actions are wrong by appealing to some standard.
You can if the standard is the good of all people. You can if the standard is common decency and respect for others and respect for human rights and dignity, which is something that you can't get to if you're rationalizing things like slavery and genocide.
If the atheist is to be consistent with their position, this necessarily is the result.
No. That is the inconsistent and irrational response that you are jumping to so that you can continue to flog the hell out of your strongman.
Interestingly, many atheists opt out for a system of utilitarianism, which attempts to have a society constructed on the idea of maximizing pleasure.
He just said that many atheists opt out for a system of utilitarianism, and then he says that that's having a society constructed on the idea of maximizing pleasure. How in the hell does your 2-year-old brain equate utilitarianism with maximizing pleasure? Those two concepts have virtually nothing in common. There are some things that could bring you pleasure that are also utilitarian in nature. There are some things that are utilitarian in nature that would probably bring you little or no pleasure at all. The idea that you have just in one sentence tried to equate utilitarianism and maximizing pleasure means that you apparently should go back to a dictionary and just look up utilitarianism, because it has nothing to do with this.
And getting rid of that which is opposed to pleasure. Now, there are a couple issues with this system.
Yeah, the issues are that you don't understand what you're talking about, but you're still rolling your video.
For one, which pleasures that ought to be maximized are not necessarily agreed upon by all people. For what one person prefers or finds pleasure in, another may detest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense if you were actually trying to create a moral system based on everyone's pleasure, which I have never seen any other atheist try to do.
In which case the majority rules on what is pleasurable. And we find a similar situation in 18th century America. For at one point the majority desired slavery as an institution that helps to maximize the moral of people in the society. But of course the issue with this view is that every human being has dignity and value. But in atheism's subjective worldview, they really have no basis for opposing slavery, for morality is merely what one prefers.
Oh my gosh, this sad dude just tried to take credit for opposing slavery as somehow being a Christian idea and atheism being against this. Who do you think those slavers were? What religion do you think those slavers were following? Who were the primary slave owners in America in the 18th century? Were they Hindus? Were they Muslims? Were they atheists? Do I really need to answer this question for you? But apparently you think that slavery was caused by everyone just doing what they wanted to do, even though it is the Bible that explicitly endorses slavery. This is dangerously myopic and outright morally disgusting, and yet you're preaching to others about what would happen if they were the evil moral consequences of atheism running around.
Another issue with this worldview is that it amounts to saying that the purpose of life is self-pleasure.
This channel, The Sanctus, seems to have a complete inability to distinguish atheism from hedonism. While it is possible to be an atheist and a hedonist, of course, many atheists are not hedonists, and many hedonists are not atheists. All of this track that you're taking about self-pleasure seems to just be a poorly reasoned argument against hedonism. And I'm not sitting here to defend hedonism, but I'm just saying that if you're going to do a video about atheism, at least make it about atheism and not about hedonism. But in order to do that, I guess you'd have to learn what atheism really is.
But atheism not only rejects universal morality, but it rejects universal purpose.
Again, there is nothing about atheism that, by definition, rejects universal morality. I will admit that there are many atheists who do reject universal morality, because ultimately, every time you say there should be universal morality, the idea is then, who is setting that morality? Of course, theists will say, oh, God sets it. But that then leads to two very sticky problems. The first horrible problem is that, for example, with Christianity, your Bible is full of disgusting amoral acts that were committed by or commanded by your God's universal morality. Then there is no basis by which we can actually reject things like slavery or genocide, because he absolutely endorses and commits those same things. The second problem with this sanctified idea that Christians have about universal morality is that they think it's all fine and good to say, well, if God says it's good, and if it's not from God, then it's bad. But what they don't realize is that in a sick sort of way, this makes them some of the most horrific moral relativists on earth. Because all it takes is one charismatic religious leader standing up and saying, this is what God told me to do. And suddenly you are full bore behind whatever it is that he tells you to do. Because once someone has, in your mind, credibly invoked the name of God, you will follow them to do anything and everything that they command you to. Because you don't really have a universal moral standard. you don't have any basis for where your morals are. The only basis that you have is that this magic person in your ancient book said it, so you hold it to be true, which on its surface might be workable, except the fact that anyone can tell you that they sat down last night and prayed, or had a dream, or had a vision, and this now is what God told you to do next. And once you reach that point, it doesn't matter if the commands coming from that person imply genocide, if they imply war, if they will create sadness and death and destruction amongst the rest of the people. As long as you believe that the command came from God, you'll do damn near anything. And that's something that most atheists will not do.
Every person's purpose then is subjective. For one person may not care to maximize pleasure.
You're right. Most atheists don't care to maximize pleasure.
They could be a depressed or pessimistic person who does not care or value these things. Now going back to subjective morality and atheism,
because you're going to keep flogging that damn straw man as hard as you can,
while also applying this idea of subjective purpose, we find a very sad issue. If there is no universal purpose, then we are left to create our own purpose. But what if we don't? As was stated earlier, what if the person is pessimistic about reality, and they can't find any driving factor or motivation to get out of bed, or to even live?
Yes, because Lord knows there aren't any Christians out there who are depressed. Because Christianity cures depression. If it weren't for atheism, there would be no pharmaceutical industry supporting antidepressant drugs like Zoloft, because we wouldn't need them. You just have Jeebus, and that would make you happy. Because apparently, Christians never get depressed.
And we find many examples of these persons in real life, who suffer in this way, for this is not merely a hypothetical. Well, under the atheistic worldview that rejects universal purpose, there's really nothing that can be objectively appealed to in order to help this person. For what if this person doesn't care for any of the potential subjective and self-purpose ideas you offer him?
So apparently, the cure for finding any of these people, for finding anyone who's clinically depressed, is to pray with them and tell them about Jeebus.
And further, under the atheistic worldview, does his life...
I just have to point out here, this atheistic worldview, this comes up again and again and again, and admittedly it's not just this video. Atheists do not have a world view. Atheism means I don't believe in your magic sky daddy candy god. That is all it means. The plethora of worldviews that exist amongst atheists is as varied as the number of atheists in the world. Now you can try to attribute certain mindsets or certain beliefs that are more common in atheists and less common in theists. But the idea that you even talk about an atheistic worldview means that you don't actually understand what atheism is. And if you can't understand the basic meaning of the term itself, maybe you should think about that before you start trying to publicize videos teaching everyone about this atheistic worldview and its evil moral consequences, because you don't seem to understand basic terminology.
Even objectively matter anyway, if there is no such thing as objective value and meaning. Unfortunately, in atheism, the answer is no.
Again, I want to point out here that he plays so fast and so free with objective morality, objective truth, objective meaning. You can't just slap the word objective in front of those phrases and then assume that you can use them interchangeably. They are not the same thing.
For it is merely subjective. For values are merely one's preferences. Thus, atheism, if driven to its logical conclusion, leads to despair, destruction, and meaninglessness.
Yes, why don't we have some demons flying around too? Because if there were more atheists, then every city in the world would be burning. You know, like Tokyo. Oh wait, that's not right. There are large parts of the world where atheism or agnosticism are much bigger percentages of the population. And those places, despite your cheesy little graphic, are not on fire.
As was stated, this on its own doesn't disprove atheism being true, but it shows the reality of atheism's evil moral consequences.
So, Think about what he just said. This doesn't disprove the idea that atheism is true. But then he wants to talk about atheism's evil moral consequences. So in other words, I guess, even if atheism is true and your God doesn't exist, we should just continue to be religious, because otherwise it would lead to horrible moral consequences if we admitted the simple fact that the God doesn't exist. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you your God doesn't exist. I'm telling you the logical conclusion of the statement that he just made,
which the majority of atheists are completely blind to. Just think of how society will collapse over time, since secularism has infected world governments as well.
Yes, like Japan. You see how those world governments have fallen and crumbled.
But under atheism, none of this truly matters, for nothing matters in atheism.
Yes, because an atheist doesn't care if everything just goes up in flames. In fact, every day I go get another big box of matches just to see if I can watch the world burn, because I don't care. I'm an atheist. What do I care if everything blows up tomorrow? I'm an atheist, dude. Yeah, atheists don't care about any of that.
As Pope Pius XII writes in his encyclical Summi Pontificatus, before all else, it is certain that the radical and ultimate cause of the evils which we deplore in modern society is the denial and rejection of a universal norm of morality, as well for individual and social life as for international relations.
Notice this quote has nothing to do with atheism, despite your sad little attempts to connect it. I definitely did not enjoy the video, although in some sort of way I did, because again, like watching one of those Mystery Science Theater 3000 movies, it's so bad that it's actually pretty good. I do think that maybe in the future we should start licensing who can actually make these videos, because you don't seem to have any command of the subject whatsoever. But you know what? Everyone can make videos and post them on YouTube anyway. And in the end, it's kind of entertaining. So thank you for joining me here today on my channel, Skepticus, not Sanctus, but Skepticus. I hope you enjoyed the drivel that was part of this video. And until next time, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.
Now, fuck up and overlook this. Jesus goddamn fucking cunt crushed. Jesus, please don't let me lose you. Yes, please don't let me lose you. Please. God damn it.
Okay, quiet everybody. And action.
The problem of evil has always been the biggest faith blocker. For centuries, atheists have argued that the existence of evil in the world is logically incompatible with the existence of God. If God is an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing being, then why would he allow evil to exist? It seems like a solid question. As Richard Dawkins once said, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, felicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. It's a few good points.
Cut.
So if this God did exist, should we even worship him? I mean, either he doesn't exist, or he's evil, and he doesn't deserve our worship. See, that's the traditional problem of evil. But these days, it's outdated. You see, these days, virtually no one really defends the logical version of the problem of evil. The reason is because it places a burden of proof on the atheist that's unsustainable. I mean, okay, see, by taking that position, the atheist has to prove that there is no possible...
Coming up next, we're counting down the song from the year that coined the phrase, oldies but goodies. It was a year of golden oldies for sure. So many incredible songs here, including the rise of a #1 instrumental track that actually sparked the British invasion, and it was recorded in a guy's flat. Actually, it was recorded in his kitchen using items from the kitchen. There's also a one-hit wonder that we play every single year for a month, and it's not a Christmas song. Plus the song that hit #1 twice by the same artist 2 years apart. It's actually an artist I tried to get an interview with, and I was told it would cost me 6 figures. Find out who next. Then there was a song from 1784 that was written from a woman's perspective that one of rock's most masculine legends took to #1 centuries later. And then there was a song that was written by a couple, a songwriting couple. They had their babysitter record a scratch vocal to it just to show the star that they really wanted to record it, what it would sound like. Then she rejected it. So they released it as is, and it became a #1 hit 4 different times for 4 different artists. Great guests and a host of other timeless classics are coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever rode these crazy rides at the amusement park, or the county fair, you're going to dig this channel with deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. I know you'll find something to dig on this channel. Also, make sure to check out our podcast on Apple and Spotify. And we got our Vintage Years collection coming back. All 6 shirts will be up soon. Look for them below or at the link up here. Today's going to be a great countdown. You know, one of my favorite sayings comes from the brilliant Brian Wilson when he told me that music is God talking to us. I mean, whether you're a religious person or not, I thought that was a fantastic thought. There's something divine about the way that music speaks to us, especially the gift of the so-called golden oldie. A classic song from way back in the day. It's so catchy, so timeless, still makes you want to sing along, maybe even dance, even decades later. It's a kind of tune that stood the test of time, and it brings nostalgia and good vibes whenever or wherever it plays. 1962 was full of great songs that can be crowned as golden oldies. It's where the phrase oldies but goodies came from, actually. We have so many great guests today, so many great stories. We're going to kick off our countdown of the top 10 songs of 62 with a trailblazing instrumental. At number 10, it's Telstar and the Tornadoes. Now, during the early 60s, humanity was captivated by space exploration. The launch of satellites, astronauts orbiting Earth, and the looming promise of the moon landing. Telstar sounded like this. It sounded like the future. And it was. It made the Tornadoes the first British band to top the U.S. charts, beating the Beatles out by over a year. It was actually inspired by a real satellite that was launched that same year, Telstar, the first active communication satellite, actually launched in July of '62. The writer and producer behind the song was an early pop genius by the name of Joe Meek. He'd later go mad. More on that in a second. Meek was a sonic pioneer, and he recorded the song in his flat, his apartment, not a studio. He created it in his kitchen, and he used homemade electronics and items from his house. He was one of the first to use tape loops and an early version of the synthesizer before anybody even knew what that was. The weird sound you hear was actually the cloud violin. It was an early synth. He used this to mimic the space sounds. Now, this song was massive. It sold 5 million copies worldwide. It makes this one of the biggest songs of the 60s. Now, sadly, Joe Meek didn't get a songwriting credit or even royalties from this song because of a plagiarism lawsuit that he eventually won, but that happened after his death. He didn't even know he won it. You see, Joe Meek was affected by schizophrenia. He had actually sunk into debt and depression, and then sadly on February 3rd, 1967, he took the life of his landlady, who was angry with him about the loudness of his kitchen studio, and then he took his own life. Very sad ending to a man who was so prolific. After his death, they actually found 1,200 unreleased recordings. Telstar was the one that kickstarted the British invasion, like I said, set the stage for the Beatles, and proved that an instrumental track with no vocals could truly captivate millions. Coming up next on our countdown to the top 10 of 62, a tune that was inspired by a nickname and some spontaneous fun in the studio. It's the re-recording of Duke Earl by Gene Chandler, coming in at number 9. Duke Earl actually has a pretty cool origin story. Started in 1961 with the Duques, a vocal group that included Gene Chandler. Actually, back then he was going by Eugene Dixon, and his friend Earl Edwards, who had a wicked baritone. Gene actually adopted the last name Chandler from the popular film actor at the time, Jeff Chandler. And Gene and Earl would often warm up by singing the simple do-do-do. They did it in different keys before gigs. So one day, Gene decided to switch things up a bit and started singing Earl's name instead. That little change turned into a catchy chant, Duke. And before they knew it, it evolved into the fun and silly phrase Duke Earl. That spontaneous moment in the rehearsal room ended up giving birth to one of the most sonic songs in doo-wop and R&B history. Everybody knows Duke of Earl. The songwriting credits for Duke of Earl go to Gene Chandler, Earl Edwards, and a woman named Bernice Williams, who managed the Duques and wrote some of their tunes. After the song took off, Gene Chandler really ran with the regal persona that he created. Dressed up in royal-style outfits to match the Duke image and really bring the character to life. Duke of Earl was a majestic smash. It reached the coveted throne atop the Billboard Hot 100, and another song from '62 that was highly influential in shaping the future of music. Sliding into number 8 on our top 10 of 62, it's the incomparable Roy Orbison with Dream Baby. Even if you've never been famous, you probably know that fame is not what it seems. It's often pretty fleeting, not nearly as glamorous as people make it out to be. At least that's what I've heard. Roy Orbison's story is a perfect example of this. Around the time that he was really hitting his stride, he was also going through some tough times. During this roller coaster that he recorded Dream Baby with Joe Nelson, a song that came straight from his own struggles with the ups and downs of stardom. Roy's personal turmoil during the time he wrote Dream Baby was largely connected to his marriage and personal relationships. In the early 1960s, Roy Orbison was experiencing significant emotional distress due to his tumultuous marriage to his wife, Claudette. They had a very volatile relationship. Theirs was marked by frequent disagreements, separations, personal struggles, infidelity, you name it, including Claudette's own battles with health issues and substance abuse. Actress Cindy Walker wrote Dream Baby, How Long Must I Dream, and she placed it in a box of songs being sent to Roy Orbison for him to review and consider recording. So when Cindy's mother was packing up the box, she noticed that Dream Baby was not inside. Later, when she asked Cindy about it, Cindy said, well, I don't think it's a song that's good enough for Roy, and I'm just going to leave it out. Her mother said, if you don't include it, you got nothing in that box. She knew it was a hit. That little push ended up making all the difference as Roy ended up recording it and releasing it as a single, climbing number 2 in Australia and the UK, and it went to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. A little fact about Roy that's interesting, during a tour with the Beatles in 1963, Roy Orbison had a bit of a mishap. He accidentally left his regular glasses on the plane. At first it was just a frustrating slip-up, but then he noticed something interesting. Wearing his prescription sunglasses on stage gave him a new sense of confidence. They became a part of his signature look, helping him hide what he thought were imperfections and easing his stage fright that he had back then. I mean, that small incident ended up shaping his mysterious, cool persona. And also, the Beatles hated having Roy Orbison open for them. First they were opening for him, then he opened for what he thought were imperfections and easing his stage fright that he had back then. I mean, that small incident ended up shaping his mysterious, cool persona. And also, the Beatles hated having Roy Orbison open for them. First they were opening for him, then he opened for them. They hated it because he was so great. The story behind the next track on our countdown to the top of 62 is a wild one. Here's a tell of Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett and the Crypt Kickers, coming in number 7.
He did the Monster Mash.
Now, after spending a year and a half touring in the Army, including a stint in Korea, Robert George Pickett finally made his way back home in 1958. And during his time in the service, he developed a knack for imitating Boris Karloff.
If you will be kind enough to excuse me for a moment, I must prepare myself.
Back in Massachusetts, he started to hone that impression when he was doing local talent shows and such. He performed at spots like the Irish American Club in Everett. His spooky spot on impersonations earned him several wins in amateur contests. With each victory, he felt more certain that he needed to take a shot at Hollywood, like most people thought back then. Deep down, he knew he had what it took to make it as a professional entertainer, and he just knew that if he got his shot, he would make it.
Stupid! God, you are
went by Boris, followed his hunch. He moved to Hollywood in 1960. Soon after his arrival in Tinseltown, Boris hooked up with Lenny Capizzi, and the two of them wrote Monster Mash. The idea being to create a novelty track like Sheb Wooley's Purple People Eater. Boris and Lenny had one music industry contact, just one, a guy named Gary Paxton. He'd actually sang lead on Hollywood Argyle's hit Alley-Oop, so there's that.
Gary Paxton and his friend, the Hollywood Argyles, put it together, and in some areas already it's the number 1 record, and it's rapidly getting there all across the nation.
Paxton produced the song for the pair of them. The initial sessions, they took 2 hours. The entire song was done in like 2 days. At the time, a young hustling session pianist named Leon Russell was credited with laying down the keyboards for the single's B-side. There's also a bit of LA musician lore. Claims that Venture's drummer Mel Taylor played on it as well. Who knows? The song's eerie sound effects, they were just clever low-budget studio improvisations. I mean, like the haunting coffin door creak, that was simply a rusty nail being pulled from a piece of wood with a hammer. And the bubbling cauldron sound, that was just water blown through a straw. I mean, these makeshift audio tricks added the chilling atmosphere of the song. Not really chilling, but fun. And they did it without costing any extra money for the guys. Now, 4 different labels turned down the song before Paxson finally decided to release it himself, and this was on August 25th, 62. Little did they know the bold move would pay out big time. By the week of October 20th, pushed by the upcoming holiday, and just in time for Halloween, the song soared to number 1 on the Billboard's Hot 100 chart, and even though it had some high-profile detractors, Dick Clark actually hated it. He didn't want it to play on American Bandstand.
The Transpark magazine wishes to present you with this award for your outstanding achievements in the recording industry.
Elvis once stated in the press that Monster Mash was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard, and he was quite the jokester. But, it was a hit anyway. And much like Dracula, Monster Mash refused to stay buried in death. The song kept coming back from the dead, re-entering the U.S. charts not just once, but twice. First in August 1970, then again in May of 1973. Imagine this, by 1973, Boris Pickett had long since stepped away from the music business. He's actually working as a cab driver in New York City. One day he's cruising through the city in his taxi when he hears that Monster Mash playing on the radio, announced by the DJs, one of the most requested songs of that day. So Monster Mash, it accomplished a rare feat. Only 3 songs in history have achieved this chart comeback. Monster Mash is one of them. That same year in October, it also soared to number 3 on the UK singles chart.
Yeah.
Now, tragically, Boris Pickett lost his 3-year-old son in a drowning accident in the 70s. He passed away from leukemia in 2007. He was 69. But perhaps more than any song on the countdown, this song comes back with a vengeance in October every single year. Brilliant. On with our countdown of the top 10 songs of 62 at number 6, I've got Breaking Up Is Hard to Do by Neil Sedaka. Neil Sedaka shared that while he often drew from his own experiences, the upbeat, lively melody of Breaking Up Is Hard to Do was a bit of a surprise. He actually originally envisioned it as a slow ballad, kind of a heartbreaker. At the time, Neil was hurt and frustrated from kind of a heartbreaker. At the time, Neil was hurt and frustrated from a breakup, and that raw emotion led him to craft a song that, despite its cheerful rhythm, captured the pain and heartache. It's one we all have sung or thought about. Here's what Neil told me about how the transformation of breaking up is hard to do and how it happened.
An idea that's universal. Everybody breaks up. Everybody hopes to make up.
That's right.
And the night before the session, I called the arranger, Alan Lova, and I said, I came up with an obbligato line. I want to put it under the whole record. Do-do-do down, do-be-do down, down. Under the whole record. Don't take your luck. Do-be-do down, down. So there were 3 Neils. In those days, we had 4 tracks. So I did the doobie-doo, the harmony, and the final lead vocal last, because that had the presence. And as I was singing, I said, if this is not number 1, I'll eat this record. It had a little Latin thing to it. Oh.
Of course, the cookies are on it, and you taught them the parts on the way to the session.
That's right.
What to sing, and tell me about that.
Going in the car, we would go over the harmonies, and then, of course, when we got to the studio before the tape was rolling, we perfected it.
Breaking Up Is Hard to Do rocketed to number 1 in Canada and on the Billboard Hot 162. Neil remade the song in 75, creating a slow ballad version of the original Imagine. That reimagining went to number 1 again in Canada and peaked at number 8 on the Hot 100. A lot of comeback songs here. Back to the countdown of the top 10 songs of 62, we have the track that sparked the dance craze and created a seismic shift in American pop culture. At number 5, I've got Chubby Checker with a twist. In the early 1960s, nobody, with a twist. In the early 1960s, nobody could have predicted that a simple dance move would ignite a cultural revolution. When Chubby Checker released the twist in 1960, that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, dance floors across America and eventually the world were alive with this new hip gyrating move that virtually anybody could do. That's why it was such a hit. It wasn't just a catchy ditty. It was a movement that broke down racial barriers, bringing people of all backgrounds together through music and through movement. Now, Hank Ballard originally wrote the twist after witnessing teenagers in Tampa, Florida, grooving to the dance that would soon take over the world. However, in a 2014 interview, Lawson Smith revealed a different story. He claimed that the song was actually written by Nathaniel Bills of the Gospel Consolators, who had initially approached the Spaniels to record it. You remember the Spaniels, they did this song. Smith also alleged that Hank Ballard stole the song and falsely claimed authorship, adding a controversial twist to the song's history. Even though his original stab at the twist was a mild hit at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100, Hank Ballard was onto something big here. But ultimately, it was all about Chubby Checker's resurrection of the song that led to the phenomenon that became the twist. Actually, Chubby was only 18 years old when he recorded his vocal for the twist during a bare-bones studio session in 1960. He wanted to get out of there because he had to get back to school. He was still in high school. At WJZ-TV in Baltimore, a DJ named Buddy Dean hosted a lively TV dance party show called The Buddy Dean Show. One day he played a song, and it instantly got the kids jumping. The twist. The reaction was electric, and Buddy knew he had something special. He quickly recommended the track to Dick Clark, who was hosting an American Bandstand in Philadelphia. Dick loved the song, but he was cautious about Hank Ballard. His reputation was marred by songs at that time like Sexy Ways and Work With Me Annie. Dick Clark, a savvy media mogul with his fingers in record labels and artist management, decided to find his own star to help break this song. He held auditions. He searched for someone with the right charisma. That's when he discovered Ernest Evans, a young man who was working as a chicken plucker at a local plant. But Ernest was no ordinary worker. He was a natural performer. During breaks, he kept everyone in the chicken plant laughing with hilarious impersonations of the biggest stars of the day. You know, there was like Fats Domino, and he did Elvis, and also the Chipmunks. Dick Clark heard potential in Ernest's talent, but no one predicted this unlikely singer would soon launch one of the biggest dance crazes in history and the biggest song on the Billboard Hot 100 charts ever.
Pretty frightening thing. It's sweeping the country all over the place. Hottest dance sensation of the last 4 years. A thing called the twist. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chubby Checker.
Chubby Checker's the twist under this. Chubby Checkers, the twist earned the distinction of being the most successful single in Billboard history, crosses various greatest Hot 100 songs of all time lists over the years. It actually held that top spot until 2021 when it was surpassed by The Weeknd's hit Blinding Lights. But we'll give it to him because of the rock era. The twist made history by hitting the top of the Billboard Hot 100 chart not just once, but twice on two separate occasions, soared to number 1 on September 19, 1960, then it made a triumphant return on January 13, 1962. Remains the only non-holiday song in American chart history to achieve this double feat. Nobody else has done it. Funny story about Chubby. About 8 or 9 years ago, he was playing a show near me, and my business partner called his manager, maybe he was his publicist, and he asked if we could get together and do an interview. This person came back and said that there would be a fee involved. Now, I've done like 800 interviews, maybe 850, and we've never paid for an interview. But, you know, he asked what the fee was. The response? $100,000. What? The call ended abruptly. It's been a running joke between me and my business partner for a long time. Maybe they were messing with us, but wow. Rolling in at number 4, it's the story of Sherry Baby, the breakthrough by the Four Seasons. It goes back to a No Frills New Jersey studio where songwriter Bob Gaudio, who was only 22 at the time, was experimenting with a catchy melody and lyrics inspired by the street life of Newark. Bob wanted the song to capture the excitement and innocence of young love, and he crafted Sherry as a tribute to a girl that he knew. But the song's real magic was in its infectious rhythm and its vocal harmonies. That magic was, of course, created by the combination of Frankie Valli, Tommy DeVito, Nick Massey, and Bob Gaudio himself. Now, what many don't know is that Sherry was originally intended for a different act, Bob Gaudio's own group, the Royal Teens. But when Bob played the demo for producer Bob Crew, he realized it was perfect for Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. And the band initially struggled to find their groove with the song, but once they nailed the vocal arrangement, they celebrated by dancing around the studio. It was a great moment. I mean, Sherry's distinctive falsetto chorus, is so iconic today. That was a natural extension of Frankie Valli's extraordinary vocal range. Now, he once revealed that singing in falsetto all the time, it was exhausting to him. But of course it became his signature sound. And Sherry was one of the first songs to showcase his falsetto to a massive audience, and that's what they wanted to hear thereafter. Even though he really kind of hated singing in falsetto, he rolled with it. Privately, he couldn't wait to sing in his natural tenor, though. Instead, the physically demanding falsetto took over. Frankie really had to psych himself up every time he had to sing in that ridiculously high octave. Boy, what a future he would have, though. Sherry was the first of 5 singles that went to #1 for the Four Seasons on the Billboard Hot 100, and it also reached the top of the singles chart in Canada and also in New Zealand. Coming in at number 3 on the countdown of the top 10 songs in 1962, it's another dance craze that took the world by storm that year. The Locomotion, performed by Little Eva. Now, Little Eva was really Eva Boyd. She wasn't a singer. Sadly, she never earned a penny performing. At that time, she was actually a babysitter. A babysitter and a housekeeper for Jerry Goffin and Carole King and their 2-year-old daughter, Louise. We actually told the story about a year ago. But Jerry had the song in his head for a bit, but he knew his wife Carole King would think it was a little silly. And they originally had singer Dee Dee Sharp, who was hot at the time, in mind to record it. Jerry and Carole, along with their famous producer Don Kirshner, felt that it would be a hit. So they forged a plan to make a demo with a female lead vocal that sounded similar to Dee Dee Sharp. To present it to her and show her what it sounded like. So they invited their babysitter, Eva, to actually do the scratch vocal on the demo. They'd heard her sing, she was good. She was actually in a singing group at the time called the Cookies. So their plan was to have her record the demo for the Locomotion, send it to Dee Dee Sharp, move forward with it. So they laid it down. Then to their surprise, Dee Dee and her label actually rejected the song outright. Now this left the door wide open for babysitter Eva Boyd. They all loved her demo. So actually, they released the demo. They didn't even re-record it. Like Don Kirshner famously said, "Who needs Dee Dee Sharp? This song's a smash." And of course, it was. Locomotion was an instant runaway hit. Little Eva's lively vocals combined with irresistible rhythm and a dance craze that inspired propelled the tune to the top of the charts. It became a massive hit in both the U.S. and abroad, sold millions of copies, and became one of the best-selling singles of the 60s. It inspired countless dance parties, cover versions across the board, but despite the song's enormous commercial success, Little Eva, her financial reward was very small. The song was written and produced by the legendary team of King and Goffin. They initially held the rights for it, of course Don Kirshner. So Eva was paid a modest fee for her vocals, which was pretty normal back then. And because she was so young and inexperienced, she didn't really fully understand her rights to negotiate for a better deal. It's actually been widely reported that Eva Boyd received only $50 for her vocals on the Locomotion. But actually, in reality, that amount was her weekly salary during the year she was recording, an increase of $15 from what Goffin and King had been paying her as the nanny. babysitter. Despite her iconic hit, she never gained ownership of the song's rights or substantial financial rewards from it. In 1971, she moved to North Carolina, living in relative obscurity, working menial jobs and relying on welfare. It actually wasn't until 1987 that she was rediscovered and received some recognition for her contribution. Sadly, she passed away in 2003 from cervical cancer. Just so unfair. Things need to change. In fact, I want to dedicate this episode to the memory of Eva Boyd. Little Eva. You deserve better, for sure. Locomotion was the only song to hit number one 4 different times with 4 different acts. There was Eva, there was Grand Funk Railroad, there was Kylie Minogue, and there was Sylvie Vartan. We've reached the runner-up spot in our top 10 songs of 62 Countdown, and I got the remarkable genius Ray Charles with I Can't Stop Loving You at number 2. Yeah, by the 60s, Ray Charles was already a legend, blending gospel, jazz, soul, and blues into a soulful sound that broke barriers across the board. But in 1962, he stepped into new territory with a song that would become one of his most enduring hits, I Can't Stop Loving You. It's heavily associated with Ray Charles, but Ray didn't actually write I Can't Stop Loving You. It's actually penned by a little-known lyricist named Don Gibson, country singer and songwriter. Gibson wrote I Can't Stop Loving You back in 1957. It was inspired by the pain of lost love, and it had already been a hit in the country world before Ray made it immortal. Don's original actually peaked at number 7 on the Billboard Hot Country chart. Now, Ray's version of I Can't Stop Loving You, it was so powerful that it recorded and moved many listeners to tears. It's said that Ray performed this song at a funeral for a close friend. He poured his own grief into every note of his song when he did it.
Everybody for himself.
No, bridge the gap between country and audiences at a time when racial barriers
Nobody got a heart.
Across the board. Don Gibson was initially surprised that Ray's version of the song had become so iconic, even though it diverged from the original country style.
Nobody got a heart.
Actually, Don gushed with great pride that Ray had such a personal connection with the song and how he poured his soul into it. And he was so excited that one of the geniuses of the rock era had the courage to take such a bold chance on a country song. I Can't Stop Loving You topped the music surveys in Australia, Sweden, the UK, and in the US on Hot 100.
Our dreams are yesterday.
All right, my friends, we're at a climax in our countdown of the top 10 songs of 1962, and it's only fitting that the song we chose as the number 1 of that year is from the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley, and his classic ballad, Can't Help Falling in Love. I Can't Help Falling in Love was a track that was included as part of the soundtrack of the Elvis movie Blue Hawaii. But it didn't start out that way. It wasn't an Elvis original written for Elvis. It was actually based on an ancient folk melody from France called Plaisir d'amour. It dates back to the 18th century. Composer Jean-Paul Guy Martini wrote it from the perspective of a woman in 1784. The melody had been passed down through the generations, enchanting audiences with its simple, haunting beauty. Now, the story takes an interesting turn when the song's lyricists Hugo Peretti, Luigi Creatore, and George Weiss were inspired by the romantic themes of love and faith. They wanted to create a ballad that captured the tender, almost inevitable feeling of falling deeply in love, something everyone could relate to. It's claimed that they wrote the lyrics specifically for Elvis, knowing his voice could bring out the song's emotional depth. I'm sure Elvis's immense popularity that practically guaranteed a hit record for any song was also another big factor in that decision. Elvis was immediately drawn to the song's gentle, almost hypnotic melody. He wanted to make sure it sounded authentic and heartfelt. During the recording sessions, he poured his soul into it, adding subtle nuances and a voice filled with vulnerability as only Elvis could. Elvis chose to record it in a single take, capturing a spontaneous and genuine emotional moments. This quick and instinctive performance is often credited as a reason why the song feels so authentic and so intimate, and of course it is. Now, Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, the jerk that he was hesitant about releasing the song as a single. He feared it might be too soft or sentimental for Elvis's image. The Colonel tried to throw the gauntlet down, but it was a battle, and Elvis was prepared to wage with his notoriously controlling manager. The King won that fight with a powerful KO in the second round. I mean, Elvis was so fond of Can't Help Falling in Love that he often performed it in private. It's a song he often dedicated to his wife Priscilla. He considered it one of his most meaningful records. The single, it crested at number 2, one of the greatest number 2 hits of all time, but it went to number 1 on the AC chart for 6 weeks. In the UK and in South Africa, Elvis's I Can't Help Falling in Love held the number 1 position for 4 weeks, ranking as one of the biggest singles in 1962 all over the world. It would hit number 1 again in 1993 when UB40 covered it. That makes it the 3rd song on this countdown to hit number 1 a second time. That wraps up our countdown of the top 10 songs of 62. Looking forward to an interesting conversation about these golden oldies. Man, what a year. Can't Help Falling in Love. What else could have been number 1? What a great song. And I love that it was written back in 1784 from a woman's perspective. And you got the most masculine singer of the 50s and 60s pulling it off. The King. What are your memories of these songs? You know, these songs take me back to the most innocent times. My grandparents, my mom and dad. I just love it. It's an innocence that we truly need at this time. Let's have a great discussion celebrating this below. Make sure to get your vintage years collections. Would you like to see more of these? Let me know. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of them.
Earth Angel, take a deep breath, because this isn't just another message on your screen. This is a confirmation straight from the throne room of heaven. You've been fighting a spiritual war you never volunteered for, and yet you're still standing. Not just standing, you've already won. And trust me, that victory has them shaking in their boots. We're not just talking about petty haters or jealous acquaintances. We're talking about people, both seen and unseen, who tried to destroy your peace, your purpose, and your soul. But what they didn't realize is that your strength didn't come from this world. It came from above. You didn't survive on your own. You dismantled entire spiritual strongholds with one divine weapon, God. Spiritual warfare is real, and it often shows up in subtle, confusing ways. Sabotage plans, draining relationships, anxiety that comes out of nowhere, and moments of despair that seem too heavy to explain. But these are not coincidences. These are spiritual attacks, because your very existence is a threat to darkness. There are stories throughout history and scripture that speak to this same reality. In Ephesians 6:12, it's written, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities."
Pit Beth. Come on, you goddamn motherfucker.
One of the questions I have received a lot over the years is, well, if you believe in God, where did God come from?
Imagination.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Blink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. You know, last month my channel celebrated its 3-year anniversary here on YouTube, and crazy as it may seem, in all that time, and among all of my videos addressing religious apologists, I have never once responded to good old Ken, you can't claim it's true if you weren't there to see it. Hey, have you read this book about things I wasn't there to see? Ham. The proprietor of Answers in Genesis, owner of the Ark Encounter, Roadside Attraction, and general apologist buffoon extraordinaire. Now, I haven't responded to him in the past because Ken is a bit of a rare breed when it comes to apologists. He's the kind of apologist who doesn't really do much apologia. Unlike most apologists who attempt to push their religion and God belief onto others, including many within his own organization, Ken doesn't often delve into why he believes in God or why he thinks others should. Largely, he just asserts Christian talking points and dogma, expresses them as if they were incontrovertible fact, and doesn't even bother to attempt to rationalize them beyond, well, it says so in the Bible. But I came across a video among his heaping mounds of religious flotsam where he is actually attempting to make an argument for belief in God. And specifically, this video is titled, What Atheists Always Get Wrong About God. Well, don't call out my people unless you intend to get a response from the Blink. So let's tackle the meanderings of this pious portmanteau and see if he can actually convince anyone to take what he has to say seriously. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, which delivers direct, demonstrable data devoid of dogma and defining dependence on divine directives. Delusions of deities dissolve when deprived of dictatorial dipshittery. May keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
One of the questions I have received a lot over the years is, well, if you believe in God, where did God come from? Or who made God? And of course, the secularists will say, well, is there really a God? They don't believe there's a God. So how would we answer that question?
Simple! Evidence of the existence of some kind of immensely powerful supernatural being and of crucial importance, that evidence not being able to be attributed to another explanation, particularly a mundane and naturalistic explanation. And this is the stumbling block that all attempts to point to some such claimed evidence runs into. Oh, look at the sun, the moon, the stars in the sky. Who put them there if not God? They're natural occurrences. We know every single step in the formation of a star. We know every single step in the formation of a planet such as ours. We know every single step in how moons form and specifically how our own moon formed. As a matter of fact, there is no occurrence of any kind that theists can point to as something that is utterly unexplainable as a natural occurrence in a godless, unguided universe. And there's the rub. Because while absence of evidence is not usually evidence of absence, there are occasions when that common phrase doesn't actually apply. And that would be in situations where one would expect to find an abundance of evidence. For instance, if someone were in a locked room, an otherwise empty room, and was told that there was actually another person in that room with them, but they could not see, touch, hear, or in any way detect the presence of another person in this small and empty room, well, that absence of evidence towards the existence of this second person would indeed be evidence of their absence. Similarly, in a supposedly God-created universe, where that universe was supposedly created in all its form and splendor by divine miracles and inexplicable magic, one would expect the formation of everything in that universe to defy any naturalistic explanation. And yet, literally nothing that we have ever encountered does. In a universe supposedly so teeming with miraculous occurrences, one would expect miracles to be recognized and validated as miracles all over the place. And yet, that has never happened. Not even once, verifiably. And in a universe supposedly created by a God that wants and desires a relationship with every single person to ever live, so much so that not having a relationship with them is a one-way ticket to them being eternally tormented and eternal suffering, something that this God supposedly wants to avoid, that irrefutable evidence of its existence should be present everywhere. Right up to and including that God speaking personally to every individual to ever live. And yet, that doesn't happen. The absence of evidence for your God, evidence which should exist in abundance if your God exists and half the things you claim about it are true, is absolutely evidence of your God's absence.
Is there really a God? How will we know that there's a God? Where did God come from if there is a God? The Bible starts off this way. In the beginning, God created. You notice something? It doesn't set out to prove the existence of God. It just says God is. God exists.
And as far as the fact that the Bible doesn't set out to prove God's existence, but just states it as a bold assertion,
I'm sure I speak for the both of us when I say...
religious texts never get into establishing their claims as true. They just assert them as facts about reality and expect the reader to accept them without question. It's always, our God exists, and here are all the things that you have to do to appease him. And here are all the things that you must never do to keep from angering him. Usually also with the hefty heaping of all other religions are false. Questioning this incontrovertible truth will get you in trouble. Oh, and make sure to give a big amount of money to the church, because that will really make God happy the most. Do you really think I give the slightest F what your holy book says about the existence of your God? Here, I have a holy book that says you should tithe all to shit to your nearest cycloptic pink tribble, for they always speaketh the truth in all things. And there's a hell of a lot more proof that my book is right because, here's the cycloptic pink tribble talking to you right now. Your God, on the other hand, has never said a single word to you, me, or anyone. And on a more serious note, while I really would like to say, hey Ken, let's get away from stuff asserted in a book that I don't agree is an authoritative text and won't be convinced by, nor will you convince any non-Christian of anything using it, I realize it would be pointless to say that because Ken goes back to the Bible pretty much every chance he gets.
And as you read through Scripture, the God of the Bible is a God who lives in eternity outside of time. In fact, when it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, in the beginning God created time. So God doesn't exist in time.
And this is one of the best examples of apologists like yourself, Ken, not understanding what you're talking about and are just repeating slogans and phrases that you've heard your whole life, have accepted, and are now rehashing. You can't say that God lives in eternity outside of time, because that's a contradiction in terms. Because eternity literally means infinite time. So what you literally just said was that God lives in time outside of time. You might as well have said that God lives in London outside of England, or God lives in Brazil outside of South America. You literally don't know what the word eternity means. It's just a word that your pastors always use, and use synonymously with something ethereal or otherworldly, and you adopted it into your theological lexicon without considering the implications of what it means. And another example of that same thing, not thinking about the implications of what you're claiming, is saying that in the beginning God created time. Creation itself is something that requires time in order to happen. Creation is a process. It requires steps to happen in a sequence. Minimally, it requires there to be a time before the decision to create was made, then a time when the decision was made, then a time when the act of creation begins. These things have to happen in this sequence in order for any process to take place. So there would have had to have been time before time began in order for your God to have engaged in the process of creation of time itself. Without time, such a process of decision-making and intentional action would have been impossible.
Well, first of all, through God, all things are possible, so jot that down.
So the biblical God exists in eternity. Now, how do we understand that? Well, we're finite beings. We're created beings. We will never understand that. We never can. Because to us, everything has a beginning. Because the universe had a beginning. Time had a beginning. And we're created in time. We're created in this universe. Therefore, to us, everything has to have a beginning. So we cannot, as finite beings that had a beginning, understand an eternal God who has no beginning.
Not true, Ken. I mean, it's kind of bonkers that you claim that we, as humans, cannot understand the idea of something eternal, or that to us, everything has to have a beginning, when you are sitting there positing the existence of an eternal being who doesn't have a beginning. Clearly, you don't have a problem wrapping your head around the idea of something existing without a beginning, nor any of the other theists in the world who claim the same thing. No, I have no problem conceiving of something existing eternally with no beginning. Now, one thing you said right, time certainly does have a beginning. At least our instantiation of space-time began 13.8 billion years ago. That's when the clock started, so to speak. So you were right about that. But you also said that the universe had a beginning, and we do not know that to be the case. The current form and presentation of our universe did start 13.8 billion years ago, but that was certainly not the beginning of our universe. Because we know that our universe existed as a hot, dense state of primordial energy called the singularity when the Big Bang expansion began. And we have no idea where that singularity came from. And since time began with the advent of the Big Bang, the primordial singularity could very well have existed eternally outside of time. Now, not only do I have no problem understanding that, and I certainly don't need to think that everything has a beginning just because I did, and I'm a finite being, but that idea of the universe existing without beginning and naturally expanding into our instantiation of space-time makes significantly more sense than your God claim. And for two main reasons. One, it doesn't violate the need for temporal creation that we talked about a minute ago. A being, like a god, would need time in order to decide to create something like a universe and then do it. But a singularity expanding into space-time as a natural occurrence would bypass the need for temporal decision-making entirely. There was no decision to be made. It just happened. Naturally. And then, too, Occam's razor, which states that one should not increase beyond reason the number of entities required to explain anything. All things being equal, the simplest solution is often the best one. So positing a supernatural God being as necessary in order to create the universe, a being who is thought of as the most complex being possible, unnecessarily multiplies entities when you can decrease that number to zero and just look at the universe's formation as a natural occurrence. Not only one less entity, but again, that entity being the most complex entity possible, thereby leaning towards a significantly simpler and far more likely explanation of the universe expanding as a natural occurrence. So no, I have no problem conceptualizing something existing eternally without a beginning. I just see that as being the universe itself instead of your God. A universe that we know for a fact exists, given our existence within it, whereas your God we have no such abundant evidence of.
But let's think about it this way. I had a little boy once who came up to me at a conference and he said, "Mr. Ham, who made God?" And I said, "Well, son, if somebody made God, you have to have a bigger God who made God, right?" And he said, "Well, yes, sir." I said, "Now you've got a problem." "Yes, sir." "Well, who made the bigger God? You have to have a bigger God who made the bigger God who made God, right?" "Well, yes, sir." I said, "Now you have a problem." He said, "I know." "Who made the bigger God? You have to have a bigger God who made the bigger God who made the bigger God who made God, right?" "Yes, sir." I said, "Now you've got a problem." I know, he said.
Don't you just love these stories from apologists like Ken here, of the timid little child asking questions like this and then shrinking on the verge of tears from Ken's unflappable logic and reason? Just the absolute knowledge bomb that he dropped on this kid, who I'm sure actually existed, and this wasn't a totally fabricated story that Ken made up out of whole cloth to try to further his point. Because even though bearing false witness is supposed to be quite the violation of the rules for a Christian like Ken, they so often ascribe to the idea that if it's done in service to the furtherance of the faith, then it's all A-OK in the eyes of the Almighty.
I don't believe it.
See, I said, you could go back and have a bigger God and a bigger God, and a bigger God, and a bigger God. You keep going back till you've got to get to the biggest God of all, which means the God who exists in eternity. The God who's outside of time. That's the only thing that makes logical sense.
For one, no it doesn't. There really is nothing logically inconsistent about an infinite regress, mathematically speaking. Different conceptions of time also make it possible, such as if time were cyclical and something at the end of a temporal period traverses time to the beginning of that temporal period and sets it all in motion again. Physicists have even developed a term for this. They call it gin particles. It refers to an object or phenomenon that appears to have no origin or cause, existing in a closed loop where it is both the cause and the effect of itself. There are also some theological ideas that allow for seemingly infinite regresses of godhood, such as the Norse myth of Ragnarok, a cycle of the death of gods and the world that leads to the ultimate rebirth of a new world, and the return of the gods, just to undergo the cycle all over again forever. Or the more modern ideas from Mormonism of exaltation, which is a belief in Mormonism that after death, some people will reach the highest level of salvation in the celestial kingdom and eternally live in God's presence, continue as families, become gods, create worlds, and make spirit children over whom they will govern. Mormons have the notion that the same God that you believe in, Ken, was once a mortal man and eventually rose up and became a god himself to be God over his own world and people, this world and all of us. And that if we are good little Mormons, we could one day be gods to our own worlds and people, who then in turn could become gods themselves, and so on and so on. So one has to be of rather limited imagination to not be able to wrap their head around the logical possibilities inherent in the who made God question. But secondly, and more importantly, the atheistic question posed to the religious of who made God is a specific refutation of a specific theistic idea. Namely that everything has to have a cause, which you yourself said multiple times in this video already, Ken. Some theistic arguments hinge on the idea that everything has to have a beginning and thus a cause. Like the cosmological argument for God that starts with the premise that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had to have a cause, something, therefore God. The argument insists, without evidence, that the universe had a beginning and thus had to have a cause. So the atheistic retort is often to insist, without evidence, that God had a beginning and thus had to have a cause. So the question becomes, then who made God? And the inevitable theistic retort is, well, God didn't have a beginning, so he doesn't need a cause. And, well, if you can assert that God can exist without a beginning, then I can assert that the universe itself can exist without a beginning. And if your God can exist uncaused, the universe can exist uncaused, and thus you can't use the cosmological argument. So, what else have you got, Ken?
Nothing else makes sense. Think about it from a secularist perspective. Why does matter even exist? Where did matter come from? When I debated Bill Nye in 2014, one of the questions asked was, where did matter come from? His answer was, I don't know, it's a mystery.
If I recall correctly, Nye was referring to what led to the Big Bang expansion that gave rise to the earliest matter and atoms as a mystery, not the process by how the earliest matter and atoms arose itself as being a mystery. Because we do know the process of how the earliest matter came to be. In the first moments after the Big Bang, the universe was extremely hot and dense. As the universe cooled, conditions became just right to give rise to the building blocks of matter, the quarks and electrons of which we are all made. A few millionths of a second later, quarks aggregated to produce protons and neutrons. Within minutes, these protons and neutrons combined into nuclei. As the universe continued to expand and cool, things began to happen more slowly. It took 380,000 years for electrons to be trapped in orbits around nuclei, forming the first atoms. And if you would ask, Well, but why did all of this happen this way? What caused those atoms to form together? That would be the nuclear force, one of the fundamental forces of the universe, like gravity and electromagnetism. It's a fundamental force that exists as a brute fact of the universe. So just because you don't have a clue how these things happened, and you are perfectly comfortable just insisting that God did it and moving on, plenty of people throughout history have not been so content to just leave it at that and have actually looked into it, and we found actual answers for all of these things.
What does secularists believe? That matter has eternally existed? Or matter came from nowhere for no reason? Or that energy has always been there? Or space has always been there? Or time has always been there? Where did it come from? Why does any of this exist? None of it makes sense.
The universe is under no obligation to make sense.
For one thing, secularists don't have a unified position on pretty much anything other than not conforming to religious doctrine. Frankly, secularist is a bad term to use, and you haven't even said the word atheist a single time in this video, even though it's in the bloody title of the video. Now, I regularly chastise...
So your little savings account went down quite a bit.
Where?
Your little savings account, you got, at least at Wells Fargo.
Okay.
You got, about $3. That's not too bad. But what I was going to show you real quick, beware of scams. Wells Fargo says if you're asked to ever provide your online banking password, PIN, or verification code, Wells Fargo will not request this only if you call them.
Yeah.
Okay, you're told you need to return your card, wire money, make a cash withdrawal, purchase a cashier's check, or deposit money at a crypto bank or ATM. Wells Fargo never asks you that, ever, to move your stuff. If they won't let you, they say don't tell anyone because it's being investigated. Hang up. If the person you're talking to will not allow you to end the call or text, they'll never do that. Hang up. Or if you're given exact steps on how to complete a transaction, including how to respond to any blank employee questions, let Wells Fargo know,
Okay.
When in doubt, contact them if it's suspicious.
Okay.
You're in charge when it comes to your money.
Yep.
Okay?
Yes.
That's your backstory.
Thank you.
Scammers are out there, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Chastise apologists for attributing any scientific or naturalistic claim to atheists in general, since atheism is not a system of beliefs and there's not a single thing that all atheists agree on, other than that we don't believe in any gods. But the word atheist would be a better term for you to use here, Ken, than the word secularists, because secularists would be even less specific. Secularists would only be referring to people who do not want to appeal to religion or spiritual belief. It doesn't even insist that an individual not believe in God. There are secular scientists who believe in God, they just don't appeal to God as a catch-all answer to life's mysteries and go out and actually attempt to find real, substantive answers. There are secular politicians who go to church every Sunday and believe in God wholeheartedly. They just don't legislate based on their religious belief. Seriously, apologists of the world, use naturalist or materialist. That would be your best bet if you're trying to cast a wide net encapsulating people who adhere to scientific understanding and reject any supernatural or spiritual claims. But anyway, I digress. For two, as far as the things you've said that secularists can't account for, and that makes no sense, well, they make total sense. Matter comes from energy. One could look at it in the way of saying that matter is just a stabilized form of energy. But Einstein's famous E equals mc squared, his formula for mass energy equivalence, shows us that matter and energy are interchangeable. Space-time began with the advent of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, a wholly natural occurrence. That expansion gave the primordial energy of the singularity room to spread out and thus cool, allowing for the aforementioned bonding of atoms and ultimately all the matter to arise. All of this came from the initial singularity, which, as I've already gone over, is totally possible as an eternal, beginningless phenomena. And as far as that not making sense to you, even though an eternal supernatural being that is significantly more complex than an eternal natural singularity does make sense to you, well, I don't care.
You know, it's interesting. I heard Richard Dawkins once asked about, a life on Earth and so on, and he suggested the idea that there could have been life on another planet. They brought life to Earth and seeded life on Earth. But then the question is, where did that life on the other planet come from? Did other aliens seed that planet with life, so then they would come to this planet and seed this with life? And then where did they come from? Then were there other aliens? It's interesting. I think fallible man would believe in eternal aliens, but not an eternal God.
Panspermia, which is the technical term for the idea of life on this planet originating outside of this planet and then traveling here by some means, is not a hypothesis that is meant to be an answer to the question of where life itself originated. It's only supposed to be an idea about how life came to be on this planet. So to criticize it as just kicking the can down the road and then forcing the question of, well, where did that life come from? Another planet? Then where did that life come from? Another planet? Well, it's to miss the point. You're getting angry at the idea for failing to answer something that it's not even attempting to answer. The primary secular answer to the origin of life remains abiogenesis, the generation of living material from simpler chemical building blocks, and that remains true even with the idea of panspermia. If anything, panspermia strengthens the idea of abiogenesis, because if it's the case that simpler life forms, like microorganisms, came to this planet from elsewhere, then that means that the same building blocks for life are present outside of our planet, and in fact are likely abundant throughout the universe, thereby decreasing the theistic idea that our planet's conditions and elements are unique in the universe, and increasing the likelihood of life arising naturally on other planets. And anyway, it's just an idea. It's not like it's a developed scientific theory, and it's made for some decent sci-fi. Who else has seen Mission to Mars?
One other little interesting thing to point out. DNA is the most complex information language system in the entire universe, and life is built on DNA. And there's no way DNA could come about by chance, because we've never seen matter produce one bit of information.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong.
Yes, we absolutely have seen matter produce information in the same way DNA does. Frankly, all matter does. Look, I've said it before and I'll say it again. DNA is just chemistry. It's a molecule containing a variety of atoms, the structure and makeup of which determines its traits and properties. And all matter does basically the same thing. The structure and makeup of literally every molecule determines its traits and properties. The atomic structure of mercury carries the information that causes it to become liquid at negative 38 degrees Celsius, while another metal, lead, melts at 327 degrees Celsius. Their atomic structure carries that information, and tons of other information, like its atomic mass, how it will interact with other elements, what it will form when combined with other elements, and what properties will that have. So it's really not that special that the makeup of DNA decides the properties that the organism built upon that DNA will possess. That's literally how all molecules work. DNA just does it a bit more complexly than most. But even then, complexity of DNA is not the end-all be-all of the things that we think of as unique and important about ourselves, like our intelligence or individuality. That is to say, we aren't all that we are as humans because our DNA is the most complex thing in the universe. Our human DNA is frankly pretty middle of the road where DNA complexity is concerned. So, not to get too into the weeds of how DNA works, but it's broken up into segments called genes. That's where we get the term genetic from, and what Ken is talking about, genetic information. And human genes are not all that complex, comparatively speaking. Compared to the human genome, the wheat genome is incredibly complex. While wheat has fewer pairs of chromosomes than humans, each chromosome set is triplicated and substantially larger. Moreover, wheat genomes contain a much greater number of genes, up to 125,000, compared to the approximately 20,000 genes found in humans. Lots of things that we would classify as lower life forms have more complex DNA and genes than we do. Lungfish, certain amphibians, various plants, etc. So genetic complexity does not correlate to things like consciousness, morality, intelligence, or any of the things that we think so vastly set us apart from most of the other life around us. It's complex because it keeps evolving and changing over time, never totally getting rid of anything, but instead adding, by way of mutation and natural selection, on top of what's already there. So claiming that DNA cannot possibly occur naturally is just totally wrong. It not only absolutely could arise naturally, but we have every indication that it did. From the Miller-Urey experiment that showcased how early organic molecules, like amino acids, could arise from inorganic matter, and lab experiments that have proven that literally all the parts of RNA and DNA can be created through natural means. There's simply no justifiable reason to think that DNA did not arise naturally.
But you know, it's interesting.
We're going to talk to Gilberto, pronouns he, him, calling in from Nice Yarn Cats. What does that even mean? Why would you put that? Who's a theist who believes in Christianity and that, I don't know what, that non-Israelites shouldn't believe in it and it's not good for you or it's not for you? Okay. Let's cover it. Gilberto, you're on the line with Force Arctic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. My name is Gilbert Trinidad. I'm from New York City. And the reason that I'm calling is to tell you that you shouldn't believe like you guys don't believe, and it's not for you. And before I start, I want to say thanks to my father Yahweh and to his son Yahweh Shi for taking the time and giving me life. So I want to say that the reason that I'm telling you,
I will also take a second before this call to thank Evolution for giving me life.
Before I begin this, is that I'm very glad that you guys are telling non-Israelites not to believe because it's not for you guys anyways. And I'm gonna go to the Bible. Just gonna read one chapter and then I'm gonna explain a little bit on what's going on here. So in Jeremiah,
so before you do, really quickly, because like I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not looking for a sermon. I want to understand. Like you say that non-Israelites should not be Christian. Is that not the opposite of what? Isn't that the opposite of what Jesus said?
No, because Jesus is not for you guys neither. So you guys are completely mistaken because Christianity have make you guys think that Jesus is for the world. That's incorrect. He's just only for the Israelite. And that's it.
Didn't he say he was for the world?
No, that's you guys are misunderstanding what's going on there. So
wait, so what's happening to everybody else? What's happening to everybody else?
So before I answer that, I'm going to read the chapter, and then I'm going to tell you what's happening.
I don't want you to read the chapter yet. I want you to answer her question.
Alright, so the other people that is not Israelite, they're going to be put into slavery, and they're going to be our servants due to what they did.
Well, that's all
historically and archaeologically and with the Bible. So you guys are
let me ask you, not necessary follow-up question. So then that makes a lot of sense why you believe in the Bible, because the Bible, you're going to have to stop for a second because it's your show. It makes a lot of sense why you believe in the Bible, because the Bible is a pro-slavery book. And here you are saying that everybody who isn't a Christian, isn't an Israelite, is going to be put into slavery. Necessary follow-up question. Do you then think that slavery is a good thing? in certain circumstances.
Before I answer that question, you gotta let me explain.
No, you're gonna answer that question. You're gonna answer that question, or you're not gonna stay on the show.
Slavery, if it's good, well, I believe what God says. I believe what God says, and which is God saying that those who lead you to captivity should go into captivity. So for sure, I believe that based on what God says, by the revelation, yes, you guys are going to slavery is good.
Okay, well, that's all I need to hear. Skeptical Heretic, I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to continue to call the slavery apologist, or do you want to move on?
I'm not a Christian, no, I'm not a...
I'm just going to put you on mute for a second, Gilberto. Nobody can hear you but yourself right now because you literally cannot stop fucking preaching. Skeptical Heretic, what are you thinking?
I have never heard this in my life, so I'm just super confused. Have you? Is this a thing that I just don't know of?
Yes. Yeah, no, I've heard plenty of Christians call in to defend slavery, and it's usually fucking gross. Sometimes...
No, but like, us becoming slaves.
That's a new one. That is a new one. The idea that everyone will become slaves is a new one. It's usually disgusting and just gross. Sometimes it's real fucking sad, where it's like this person who just is in this logical trap. You know what I mean? I don't know. From what we're getting from Gilberto here, it sounds like it's in the gross box, but I could be wrong. Who knows? Gilberto, I'll bring you back. Do you have a question to follow up with Skeptical Heretic before we unmute this man?
I don't. No, I'm just confused by what he's even saying, but I'm.
I'll bring you back.
By what he's even saying, but I'm.
I'll bring you back.
By what he's even saying, but I'm.
I'll bring you back. I'll ask a question, Gilberto. Under the slavery that you're talking about in the Bible, would you, not will you, would you like to be a slave? Would it be a good thing for you?
For me? Why would I be a slave? No,
that's not what I asked you. I asked would you like to be?
Well, I have to accept it if I would have to be.
I asked would you like to be?
If I would like to be?
Yes.
Of course not. Of course not.
Okay, so then why would you want anyone else to be?
Well, it's not that I want, it's why I want what my father wants, which is revenge for what his sons and children went through from your ancestors.
Okay, so then you think that because of what my ancestors did, I should be made a slave. Is that justice to punish someone's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren?
Oh, yes it is. Yes it is. For simplicity, the Bible, right? It says, "We pray louder, for they increase for their fathers."
So, it's funny. That's you are not the only person who believes that, Gilberto. You're not the only person who believes that. Kim Jong-un also believes that. In North Korea, if you defect, if you speak out against the state, then you and your children and your grandparents and like the whole family line for like 5 generations are punished. So you're believing the same kind of thing as a fascistic dictatorship, and you believe that slavery is a good thing. Those are atrocious, horrible things to believe, Gilberto.
No, that's incorrect, because I don't believe that like just for saying something. I'm not like the state because the state.
No, you're right. It is actually significantly worse than that. You don't believe in it because of say. I'm going to mute you again. You don't believe in it just because someone said something. You believe in it because of how someone was born. So it's racism mixed into the fascism. It's not just, I believe that you should be punished for speaking out. It's I believe you should be punished for being born who you are. You should be made a slave because of what your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents did. What a horrible worldview. I hope Kevin is still listening to see how far the termites can spread and rot someone's brain to speak such evil, horrible things. I'm going to ask you again, Skeptical Heretic, do you have something you'd like? Do you want to continue on with Gilberto the slave apologist?
I'm kind of at a loss for words because I've just never heard this theology in my life that like everyone is going to be slaves. I just realized I just never heard that. I have questions, but I don't think he's going to answer them. So, like,
we can try. We can try.
Where is that in the Bible saying we're all going to be slaves except for them? I guess is my question.
That's the question. Gilberto, where does it say in the Bible that everybody's going to be slaves?
So if you go to the Bible,
that's what we asked.
And you go to the chapter of if you go to the Bible, right? In the with the AAB, AAB.
You keep doing that. I'll pull up the articles of the. I'll pull up the constitutions of the various Confederate States in America where they talk about how slavery works and why it's reasonable.
I've just never heard of this. I don't know. I don't think it's in the Bible. I've never heard of this in my life.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that, like, I think we're kind of done.
So if you
Honestly,
go to Isaiah 14, chapter 14, verse 21 to 22 say, "Prepare slaughter for his children, with the iniquities of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fulfill the face of the world, his deities. For I will raise up against them, say the Lord of hosts, cut them off of Babylonian, and remember them in the stone of the new fields." So basically, what Isaiah is saying is, because of the iniquities of their father, because your great-great-father did to my ancestors,
These god fucking damn poems.
That's gonna be paying for that. For your ancestors, which is the Romans, the Greeks, will be your ancestors, and many other people.
I'm not Roman or Greek.
Oh yes, you guys are. You guys are from the same nation. So you guys will be the Edomites. The Edomites that come from Esau.
I'm not. I promise you, I'm neither Roman nor Greek.
You're Esau. You're Edomite. So for that reason, that you guys slave us, killed us, and many other things that you guys
I didn't do any of those things.
To pay out for that. And that's that. I want to add the last thing is that not even a scientific laboratory or whatever experiment you're trying to do will recreate the sun, the moon, or anything that has created.
Okay, so that's a totally different thing that's really fucking boring. I want to stay on this.
I just want to add that on there. So.
Okay, well that's fucking stupid, but like that's not the point. The point is, it makes sense that you would be sticking with Isaiah, because Isaiah is also the part where God says that He creates all evil. So it totally makes sense that you would be talking about Isaiah, because the God described in Isaiah is the one who says, "I create darkness and light, I create good and evil, I, the Lord, do all these things." So it makes sense to be preaching a very evil philosophy here from that book. But I would also say that what you're talking about here is genuinely uniquely disgusting, but I don't think you care what I think. I think you've just gone on the show to say a bunch of dumb shit. I hope that everybody else listening to this, I hope people watching this, see exactly what this is. I'm very glad we took this call, Gilberto, because the thing about Christianity, especially like evangelical Christianity, shut the fuck up, Gilberto. The thing about evangelical Christianity is that it prepares you for fascism. Right? This is what it does to a thinking brain, right? It makes you get into this headspace where you cannot question God. Anybody who speaks ill of God is going to hell. If you don't believe everything that God tells you to believe, you burn for eternity. And also, slavery is good, but depending on who you are and who's born, just literally by nature of being born, you deserve enslavement. Generational punishment is good. I can punish you and your family and your family, your father's father, and your children's children, all burn because of my will and my edict All of that is setting you up for fascism, for believing whatever the dictator says, whatever the state says. I will believe. If you question it, you get tortured, you get burned. Your whole family all need to be tortured for you disagreeing with the state, with the thing. Gilberto, you're a fascist piece of shit, and thank you so much for showing the world what your religion is and what it teaches and how fucking evil and awful and miserable a person it will make you out to be if only you turn your brain off long enough to continue believing it. With that, I'm good to move on from this call. What about you?
Yep, I'm good.
Fucking gross. Fucking gross, Gilberto. I strongly encourage you to fuck yourself.
He was very confident in the way he was like, yep, you guys are gonna be slaves.
It's tough.
Coming up next, we're counting down the song from the year that...
Okay, quiet everybody.
Will you please move, you piece of shit? Holy fucking Jesus fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Christ the fuck. The fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. I do. I do.
Okay, in this video I want to give a super brief overview of just 3 basic reasons why I think it makes a lot of sense to believe in God.
Actually, this doesn't make sense.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today we're going to be hearing from a fellow named Gavin Ortland, and he's going to be giving us 3 reasons why we should believe in God. And, well, actually 3 reasons why we should believe in the Christian God, because having looked a little bit ahead into his video, it's going to get very Christian-centric by the end. But, you know, great overall. After all, ever since I lost my faith over a decade ago, I've been on a consistent search for good, convincing, non-fallacious, non-scientifically ignorant, and anything approaching likely to be true reasons to believe in any God. And I found absolutely nothing in all of that time. In my experience, every argument in favor of any supernatural deity, particularly one as described as the Christian God often is, with the tri-omni properties of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence, well, they just end up violating all logic and end up being largely self-contradictory. Most of the arguments are fraught with fallacies, like appeal to popularity. Oh, there's over 2.5 billion Christians in the world. How could they all be wrong? Even though the popularity of the Christian claim absolutely has no bearing on its truth value. Yes, even if there were 8 billion Christians in the world, they could still all be wrong. Or another common one is personal incredulity fallacy. You think the universe and life on Earth and the sun and moon and stars and everything just happened on accident? Well, for starters, that's not an argument at all. At best, it's a dismissal of an argument that you don't like, but it does nothing to advance your own preferred idea of a God being behind it all. But it's also a straw man of any naturalistic position, as it's not claimed that anything happened by accident, but by the inescapable eventuality of the matter and energy of the universe acting and reacting in natural, predictable patterns that led to the formation of everything we see. And these are just a couple of common ways theistic arguments often fail. But I don't want to put words in Gavin's mouth here. I mean, he hasn't made any of those statements or arguments yet, and hopefully he'll steer clear of them. But let's dive in and see what kind of reasons he does have for why he thinks everyone should believe in not only a God, but his Christian God. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, pop a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, that open-minded organism overlooking otherworldly overlords to obtain optimal outcomes. Outmoded orthodoxies often offer only onerous obligations, obscuring our own obvious observations. May keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
Number one is, I think God makes a lot of sense out of the world that we live in. For two reasons. Number one, it looks like our world began. And number two, it looks like our world is designed or ordered in such a very precise way that it can permit life.
Well, yes on the first and no to the second. Yes, the planet that we inhabit clearly did form. It hasn't always existed as a planet. But the non-infinite nature of the Earth is in no way an argument for the existence of any God. All planets form over time. It's not special. It's mundane and down to the natural forces at play in the universe, primarily gravity. But as to the idea that it appears designed, implying that it is the way that it is intentionally and made to be that way, then no, that doesn't appear to be the case at all. But we'll get more into that as Gavin gets more into explaining his line of thinking.
On the first point, there are different views today. This is a little more complicated. There's some what are called non-standard cosmologies. But the most common view among scientists is that our world actually began. And the reason that's so shocking is that it's not as though there was sort of empty space and then stars came into existence or light or something like that. What most scientists think is that there was literally nothing. So space-time itself came into existence at the moment of the Big Bang.
Oh, no.
Ahem. The Big Bang was not...
Oh, no.
Ahem.
To existence at the moment of the Big Bang.
Oh, no.
Ahem. The Big Bang was not the explosion of the universe out of nothing. It is the expansion of the current presentation of our universe from an initial state of high density and temperature. Why is this so hard to understand? Where do you people keep getting this shit? This idea that most scientists believe that there was nothing and then bang, zip, pow, the entire universe popped into being from utter nothingness. Is this just something your pastors or other apologists have told you that all scientists believe and you didn't bother to do a simple Google search to check to make sure if it was accurate before repeating it? I mean, I know the answers that Google gives are AI generated and not always 100% reliable, but it is a good place to start to do a little bit of fact checking on claims that you hear people in your theistic circles making. No, scientists generally don't think there was absolutely nothing before the Big Bang. While the Big Bang Theory describes the universe's expansion from an extremely hot, dense state, it doesn't necessarily imply a state of nothingness before that. Instead, it's possible that something existed in a different form before the Big Bang, or that the universe has always existed in some form. And I've gone deeper than just the Google search in my own exploration. And I've never encountered a single science textbook, website, author, or claim from any reputable scientist who claims that there was literal, absolute nothing. And then out of nothing, all of space and time just exploded onto the scene. Even Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, is a misnomer. Because he explains in it that the kind of nothing he's talking about is a quantum vacuum. This isn't truly nothing in the absolute sense, as it's still governed by the laws of quantum mechanics and is a dynamic entity. A quantum vacuum is a sea of fluctuating energy from which virtual particles, matter and antimatter pairs, constantly pop in and out of existence for fleeting moments before annihilating each other. That is not nothing. No cosmologist or physicist or scientist who knows even a little bit about the subject claims that the universe came from genuine nothing. The only place I have ever heard that claim was by theologians and apologists who like to claim that all scientists agree that the universe came from nothing. And they do so without ever citing a single source or mentioning even one of these scientists by name. Why? Because most know that they're lying. And the ones that actually think that it's true don't bother to do their due diligence before further spreading and perpetuating those lies. There is no scientific consensus that there was ever actual, literal nothing. There was a mass of primordial energy of infinite density and heat, providing all of the necessary building blocks for the expansion of space and time. That's as far back as we are capable of examining the evidence. And that is not nothing.
Which is really... people talk about how disturbing this was in the 20th century among scientists when it was discovered, and there's lots of resistance to it, because it obviously has resonance with the old theistic idea of creation ex nihilo. And it's really hard to explain how something can pop into existence from nothing without some kind of transcendent cause behind it. And that cause doesn't have to be a personal God, but it has to be something. And a personal God is a pretty good candidate for it.
And that right there is exactly why apologists have lied about this and perpetuated the idea that science claims everything came from nothing. Because it lines up with their idea of God and an all-powerful being outside of physical reality, bippity-boppity-booing the entire universe into existence from nothing. So again, displaying the disingenuousness of many apologists who know that it's lies when they say it, and the ineptitude of other apologists who believe it without checking on it first.
And then secondly, when you look at the kind of world that's come into existence, it's exquisitely well put together. Just forget questions that could be touched by evolution, like, fine-tuning in the animal kingdom. Just look at the physical constants that are present in our world, things like the speed of light, the gravitational constant, things like that. It's absolutely amazing. The dials are set just right, such that we can live in a life-permitting universe.
So this is just a teleological argument, something that's been dealt with and debunked many, many times before. The best rebuttal to this argument is that you're presupposing that the constants of the universe not only could be different from what they are, something that you don't know to be true, but you're also assuming that every other way the constants of the universe could be had an equal or greater chance of happening. Neither of these is an assumption that you can justifiably make. We have no idea how to even begin to alter the constants of the universe, such as the ones you mentioned like the gravitational constant or speed of light. And near as we can tell, there are immutable qualities of the universe. So to make an argument that if they were different, life couldn't exist, is to say that you think it's possible for those values to be different from what they are. Well, what do you base that on? What gives you the notion that they can be different at all? See, this is what happens when you start with an idea of an omnipotent God being existing, and then you work backwards from that conclusion in an attempt to find reasons to justify that already held belief. Even if done with an actual desire to validate the belief, not to obfuscate or deceive, it still leads one into unjustifiable reasoning. You're starting with the idea of a God who can do anything, and then you come to the way the universe operates and you think, hey, God, who can do anything, could have made the fundamental forces and constants of the universe work differently than they do, and that would mean that life as we know it couldn't exist. So it's a good thing that the all-powerful God I believe in set the rules the way that they are. And that sounds like valid reasoning to you. But that isn't the way it works. If something seems to be an unchangeable brute fact, you don't get to concoct a figure to give credit for that brute fact to. If something is the way that it is, and it cannot be other than the way that it is, then it doesn't need anyone to make it that way. It just is what it is. And then there's the further faulty idea that even if the constants could be different than they are, that it is unlikely that they would exist the way that they do, and more likely that they would have some other value, which wouldn't allow for life. How exactly did you calculate that, I wonder? Can you show me the math that shows that there's an equal or greater chance that the constants could have different values than they do? The reality is that the universe conforms to the forces at play, not random chance. Even if it looks like something is random, it isn't. I mean, for example, if you're spinning the roulette wheel, there actually isn't an equal chance that the ball will stop on any one of the numbers. It's entirely due to things like the momentum of the spinning wheel, the exact amount of force the spinner put on the ball when they tossed it onto the wheel, and, of course, the force of gravity pulling on the ball, the angle the ball impacts the various parts of the wheel that it comes into contact with during its cascade around it, inertia, etc., all these kinds of forces. It only seems random to us because we don't have the ability to perceive every tiny little push, pull, bounce, and effect on that ball. But believe me, the ball is only doing exactly what the forces at play caused it to do. Meaning that in that moment, when those exact forces were at play, it could only have landed on the exact number that it lands on. The same is true with literally everything in the physical universe. Everything conforms to the forces acting upon it. So, what makes you think that there was an equal or greater chance for the constants to be any other way than the way that they are? Basically, the teleological argument convinces people of the existence of God in the same way that a roulette wheel landing on the number that a gambler picked convinces him that it happened because he wore his lucky underwear that day. It's ignorant incredulity.
The second reason I think it makes a lot of sense to believe in God is because of what we experience as human beings. And I actually think that within an atheistic worldview, you don't have a great foundation for things like rationality, consciousness,